Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to another Explainer, where we take complex realities, break them down, and really figure out what's going on. Today, we're descending into what is, without a doubt, one of the most intense, tightly controlled environments on the entire planet. We're looking at CCOAT, El Salvador's massive mega prison. And this isn't just your standard correctional facility. It's a fortress explicitly designed to hold the world's most high-profile, ruthless criminals. Throughout our deep dive today, we're going to explore the architecture of total, unyielding control, the absolutely unprecedented crackdown that filled its walls, and ultimately the profound human and societal costs of engineering absolute peace.
So it all starts with a pretty staggering question, right? How exactly do you lock up 40,000 gang members? Well, the answer is you build a facility specifically for the absolute worst of the worst. For decades, organizations like MS-13 and Barrio 18 completely dominated El Salvador, extorting locals, causing immense suffering, just practically running the streets. So when the government decided to reclaim the country, they needed somewhere to put the people responsible. And what they built was this mega prison with a terrifying, absolute premise. Those who enter its gates are destined never to leave alive. There is, quite literally, no way out.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer physical footprint required to achieve that kind of control. We're talking 410 acres. To put that into perspective, it's a sprawling, completely isolated complex made up of 8 separate massive modules. Built from the ground up in 2022, the whole facility operates entirely off the grid. It was engineered with its own independent electrical and sewage systems, plus backup power plants that can run the whole shebang for a full week if the outside supply is ever cut off. So it's essentially its own self-sustaining island of incarceration.
But, just being in an isolated location isn't enough. The perimeter itself is this intense psychological and physical barrier. Surrounding the whole place is a towering 9-meter-high wall topped off with a 3-meter electric fence pumping 15,000 volts. You've got 19 watchtowers constantly monitoring the grounds. Signal jammers completely sever all communication within a 2-kilometer radius. But honestly, perhaps the most brilliant and chilling sensory detail is right there on the ground itself, the pebble alarm system. The ground between the barriers is intentionally covered in loose pebbles, meaning any single footstep creates this loud crunch. Sneaking away? Physically impossible. The entire design isn't just about preventing escape. It's literally meant to erase the very idea of it from the inmates' minds.
Section 1. The 2022 Gang Crackdown. To understand the prison, we have to understand how it got filled. Everything shifted dramatically in March 2022. Under President Nayib Bukele's administration, a state of emergency was declared, and that triggered a massive, rapid sweep across the entire country. The timeline here is just mind-blowing. Within just 16 months, over 70,000 individuals were arrested. That is roughly 2% of El Salvador's entire adult population. And these weren't quiet, under-the-radar arrests. We're talking about buses transporting thousands of chained individuals, sitting with their heads lowered, one right behind the other, in these tightly coordinated massive nighttime operations. Their lives basically changed overnight as they were absorbed into the system.
So the crucial point is the severe tension between total security and the human cost. Once an inmate is registered at CCOAT, that's it. They lose all contact with their loved ones for the rest of their natural lives. Family visits, strictly forbidden. But the sheer speed and scale of this sweep came with a much darker side. A number of innocent people were mistakenly swept up during the chaos of the crackdown, and because of the absolute no-contact policy, their families have absolutely no idea where they are, or honestly, even if they're still alive.
Section 2. Life inside the modules. Let's actually head inside and see what the conditions are like.
To even get into the cell blocks, inmates first have to pass through these high-capacity X-ray scanners that check for microchips or contraband hidden deep inside their internal organs. Once they finally get inside, they are afforded exactly 0.5 square meters of personal space. Think about that. Every module contains 32 cells, and each one of those cells holds anywhere from 80 to 150 inmates. There are no courtyards, there are no ventilation rights. They spend their days stacked tightly on 4-level metal bunks, completely without pillows or mattresses. And for drinking water, there's no tap, just a single blue barrel shared among everyone in that entire cell.
And this brilliantly illustrates the intense irony of CCOAT's design. Out on the streets, simply walking into a rival neighborhood would mean certain death. Members of MS-13 and Barrio 18 spent years, decades really, tearing the country apart in bloody conflicts. Yet inside these cells,
Members of these fiercely rival factions are now forced to sleep side by side mere inches apart until their last breath. Stripped entirely of their territory and their power, they have literally no choice but to learn how to exist together in an impossibly tight space.
Now their pasts are permanently etched right onto their skin. The tattoos covering their faces and bodies act like these visual micro-narratives of loyalty and extreme violence. A teardrop signifies a life taken, and some of these guys have so many teardrops they've literally lost count of their victims. A spiderweb represents being caught in the permanent web of the justice system, and those famous laugh now, cry later masks, they send a chilling message. Stay strong in the face of hardship now and face the consequences later. Well, inside CSIM-Yakat, later has finally arrived.
The daily reality inside is basically an exercise in sensory deprivation and brutal, strict routine. Inmates get exactly 1 hour of exercise per week. The rest of the time, locked in. Their diet is essentially just beans, rice, and pasta, zero meat, zero high-quality protein, and they eat it directly with their hands. For bathing, they use plastic dippers from a single shared basin right next to open toilets. But perhaps the most psychologically taxing part is the lighting. The artificial lights in the modules are kept glaringly bright 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for constant surveillance. To get any sleep at all, inmates actually have to wrap their single allotted towel tightly over their eyes.
Section 3. Total and complete isolation. Let's look at the absolute lowest layer of the facility.
If life in the general modules sounds severe, the isolation cells are just something else entirely. If an inmate breaks a rule, this is where they go. The law permits authorities to hold them in these punishment cells for up to 15 days at a time. Inside, you get a concrete bed, a toilet, a water bin, and a sealed heavy door. The sensory void is absolute. There's only a single, tiny hole that barely lets in any sunlight or fresh air. It is so dark in there that inmates often can't even see their own hands in front of their faces. Cut off from the outside world, without a book, without any distraction whatsoever, they're left entirely alone with their thoughts. It's explicitly designed to break even the toughest criminal minds.
To really understand the minds inside these cells, we can look to an inmate known as Psycho. He's a high-ranking gang member with a 34-year criminal history, personally responsible for over 50 deaths. Speaking to documentarians, he reflected on the ultimate cost of his lifestyle, saying, "I lost my mom, my dad, my son, everything right here because of the gangs. This is how the devil pays the people." It's a pretty stark admission from a man who once held the power of life and death over his entire neighborhood.
The psychological weight of a permanent sentence, it eventually catches up. Stripped of his gang identity, totally isolated from the world, and knowing full well he will never see his 21-year-old son again, Psycho admitted, "I lay down on my bed and I think a lot of things, and sometimes I cry." It really grounds the staggering data and the extreme architecture we've been looking at into a deeply human, albeit incredibly grim, reality of lifelong regret. His final thought really serves as a bridge back to the society he left behind. His message to the outside world is remarkably simple. I tell the youth, hey, go to school, listen to your mom, listen to your dad, don't live this life that we live right here. There's no way out. It's a permanent warning, delivered from a permanent resident.
Section 4. The price of peace. Let's move to and see how this builds our understanding of the broader national picture.
Zooming back out, the national statistics present an undeniable reality. At the absolute peak of the gang chaos, El Salvador saw a staggering 104 lives lost per 100,000 people in a single year. It was, statistically, one of the most dangerous places on earth. But look at this dramatic drop. By 2023, following the massive crackdown in the opening of COCOT, that rate plummeted to just 2.4 per 100,000. Just going by the numbers alone, El Salvador has literally been transformed into one of the safest countries in the world.
But of course, we are left with a profound juxtaposition. On one side, neighborhood peace has been unequivocally restored. Everyday citizens can finally walk their streets without the constant, looming fear of extortion or violence. But on the other side, this peace was purchased with the severe loss of civil liberties, the sudden, sweeping incarceration of 70,000 people, innocent citizens lost in the prison system without a trace, and the unyielding, highly controversial human rights conditions inside the mega-prison itself.
Which brings us to our final point, and a question I really want to leave you with to consider for yourself. As the world watches El Salvador's grand experiment in absolute incarceration, we have to ask, is this true justice? Is it a necessary harshness for a country pushed entirely to the brink? Or is it merely a temporary way to control chaos,
a brutal fix that ignores much deeper systemic issues. Look, there are no easy answers here, but understanding the intense mechanisms of Siakat is the absolute first step in grappling with these massive ethical trade-offs. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll see you in the next one.